slide. Excellent. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 6th plenary session for Bio Africa Conference in Durban, South Africa. It's a pleasure to host you today, and today the topic will be Africa's new public health order, and ultimately the lessons learned from COVID-19 as well as deep manufacturing. This topic really has come about from the inequity of healthcare supply within Africa, the lessons learned from it, the policies and frameworks developed, and ultimately now really a new vision to execute what that picture looks like to take Africa to new heights. I do think we can all agree that the topic is relevant. Unfortunately, we have an esteemed list of panelists that will be going into a deep dive of what that picture looks like today, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce them. Starting off with the lady in red, Professor Petro Terblanche. Professor Terblanche has a successful track record in the strategic and operational management of technology-intensive organizations. She has played a key part in the design and implementation of South Africa's biotechnology strategy. She holds the position of CEO of Afrigen Biologics, based in Cape Town, South Africa. Afrigen hosts the WHO Global mRNA Technology Development and Transfer Hub, and has an mRNA COVID vaccine capacity and capabilities in LMICs to design, develop, and produce mRNA vaccines. A considerable part of her career was in research, development, and innovation in the South African Medical Research Council, as well as the Council for Strategic, Scientific, and Industrial Research. She has held and is holding several strategic public and private sector board positions in South Africa, as well as the position as president of the Stakeholders Organization for the Global Alliance for TB Drug Discovery and Development. She has several qualifications, which include a Master of Science and a Doctor of Science in Medical Oncology from the University of Pretoria. A postdoctoral, she was visiting as a scientist at the Harvard University School of Public Health, and thereafter completed a Management of Technology program at MIT, in addition to several management and leadership programs from leading institutions globally. Prof. Terblanche is the author of more than 200 scientific publications and conference papers in public health. She was recently acknowledged as one of the Legends of Science by the Academy of Sciences, South Africa. Next, to her left, Dr. Janet Biaruanga. Dr. Janet is a qualified medical doctor and public health expert that obtained her postgraduate diploma in public health research from the University of Edinburgh, and has over 14 years of experience in international development with special focus in human and social sciences. She serves as Health Policy Officer at the African Union Commission since 2007, where she provided technical leadership and oversight in the development and delivery of key strategic continental policy frameworks, programs, and initiatives geared towards strengthening the continent's healthcare delivery system, food security and nutrition, and promoting the social well-being and rights of women and children. Dr. Biaruanga joined the African Union Development Agency NEPAD as a Senior Officer of Public Health. She is in charge of coordinating and facilitating development and implementation of policies and health and medical products and ensuring their alignment with industrial development, trade, science, technology, and innovation policies and advancement of the African Union's African Health Strategy and the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa. She has since October 2022 been acting as Head of Human Capital, overseeing health and education. To her left, Mr. Martin Uton. Martin is a manager in the Global Fund Supply Chain Department. He heads a team that oversees the demand-side activities in the Supply Operations Department, which is where, amongst other responsibilities, the supply and demand activities relate to the Global Fund's pooled procurement mechanism. In 2022, the Global Fund's pooled procurement mechanism supported the procurement of $1.75 billion of medicines, diagnostics, and preventative products supplied to 83 countries across all continents. Martin trained as a pharmacist who was working for 7 years in the United Kingdom and has worked for the past 30 years on access to health products in low and middle income countries across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Eastern Europe. Martin has worked for several organizations, including being based in Eastern Europe and Africa for the World Health Organization, in Eastern Europe for the United Nations, in the Netherlands for Health Action International, and for the last 14 years at the Global Fund in Geneva, where he has worked on both supply and demand sides of procurement and supply chain management. Online is joining two panelists, the first of which Dr. David Mukanga. He's the Deputy Director of Africa Regulatory Systems at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he leads the Foundation's Africa Regulatory Systems Optimization portfolio and the linkages between regulatory systems and healthcare services. Dr. Mukanga has a combined 24 years of experience spanning regulatory affairs, health systems development, and clinical research, including 10 years in academia and 7 years leading a nonprofit that built surveillance and laboratory capabilities across 20 African countries. David received his professional training at Makerere University, the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and the Karolinska Institute. Second from last, Dr. Yunu Kibede, also joining us online. Dr. Kibede is the head of his division for laboratory systems and the acting head for the division of surveillance and disease intelligence at Africa CDC. A continental effort of strengthening laboratory and surveillance systems. He has particular focus in strengthening laboratory leadership, capacity, infrastructure improvement, access to diagnostics, including local manufacturing, pathogen genomics, surveillance of networks, and supporting early warning systems and strengthening event-based surveillance at community level. He also leads continental efforts of strengthening biosafety and biosecurity, One Health approach to control AMR, and laboratory and surveillance data integration through the promotion of connected diagnostics. He's a medical microbiologist and public health expert with over 20 years of clinical, teaching, science, research, capacity building, and program design and management experience. Before joining Africa CDC, he worked for more than 13 years as technical officer and later as branch chief of laboratory at United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Ethiopia, where he provided strategic leadership for one of the most successful laboratory systems development programs by CDC through the support of PEPFAR. Before joining CDC Ethiopia, Dr. Yunu worked as assistant lecturer, and later as assistant professor in Gondar College of Medical Sciences, University of Gondar. He served as head of department and hospital laboratory and member of academic commission of the college. He has also written lecture notes on microbiology, immunology, parasitology, and authored and co-authored more than 50 articles in peer-reviewed journals. He has a medical doctorate degree from Gondar College of Medical Sciences, a master's in medical microbiology from Addis Ababa University, and a master's in public health from the University of Gondar. Last but not least, my co-moderator, Dr. Nikes Ndembe. Dr. Ndembe has over 20 years of productive research in infectious diseases, mainly on viral evolution, drug resistance, and development of novel clinical assays. His postdoctoral on viral fitness and HIV drug resistance at Case Western Reserve University led him back to Africa to the head of virology laboratory at the UK Medical Research Council and the Uganda Virus Research Institute. During his time as Director of Laboratory Research for the Institute of Human Virology in Nigeria and the US PEPFAR, he carried out an implementation science project that engaged sexual and gender minority populations in Nigeria. Furthermore, he played a role in strengthening the laboratory facilities that supported the study and worked closely with a variety of local and international stakeholders to ensure that the project was a resounding success. Dr. Nakase is a Senior Strategy Policy Advisor to the Africa CDC and Prevention DG and currently Associate Professor, the Division of Epidemiology and Prevention of the Institute of Human Virology, the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Baltimore, USA. Dr. Ndembe is a graduate of Kanazawa University School of Medicine, Department of Viral Infection and International Public Health, Japan, and a research professor within the same institution. He is a principal investigator on numerous grants, including US National Health Institute. He has authored and co-authored over 200 scientific publications in peer-reviewed journals. He is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Public Health in Africa, the AIDS Research and Therapy, and serves on various WHO and US NIH advisory groups. Before I hand over to Dr. Ndembe, I'd just like to ask everyone to give the panelists a warm welcome before they continue.
Thanks, Mike. I think, great. I think let's get to, first, it's a great honor to have all these talented panelists here. So I think one of my best panels so far. So let me get by setting the scenes on what is the new public health order. So next slide. Hope that's, yeah. So I would like you to pay attention to this slide a little bit because that's where we're going to bring that concept of the new public health order. On the right hand, you can see clearly that when the rest of the world had vaccinated more than 70% of the population, Africa, we just were at 5%. This is quite unacceptable. So on the left hand, very clear, very good example, but we're limiting it to the vaccines because it speaks really volumes in terms of prevention. You can see clearly that on the left, we only produce 1% of all the vaccines administered, what you can know. So I think it's a call really for new public health order. I think we need to change the way things are happening currently on the continent. And this can apply to diagnostics, can apply to, again, therapeutics and other commodities or essential medicine. So on the new public health order, there are very clear pillars. We need to strengthen our National Public Health Institute and research, being sure that we really have a robust R&D system in place to be able to drive innovation. The second, we need to build that workforce. It's very important. If we have a next pandemic for disease X, we need to have a pool of epidemiologists, researchers, that all these panelists here currently can actually ride on to really advance science in a very short term. You cannot do that if we don't actually have prevention tools. It's very important, biomedicals, interventions, vaccines. You need to know your epidemiology, diagnostics, again, have the drugs, therapeutics, and then all those actually tools that are required to be able to fight, I say fight really, the pandemic. I think we have to learn from COVID. So next, you cannot do that if you don't have enough resources. You have to mobilize resources, get into partnerships, get more people involving. All of us in this room, we can play that key role to be able to drive that agenda that I mentioned in those three pillars. Again, you need to build that private, public-private partnerships to be able to advance. It's very important. They are all interlocked. You cannot financing, but you don't have good partnerships. You don't have really strong or reliable institutions. That's not going to move forward. Very important as we move forward in this conversation. So one of those flagship programs that we've established within the Africa CDC. By the way, this is just one of 50 flagship programs during COVID only. And then my colleagues are going to touch base on the nitty-gritty and the details. The partnerships for Africa vaccine manufacturing. And you can see clearly we're articulating around partnerships. We cannot build this alone. And this is a continent of 55 AU member states, 1.3 billion people. We all have a role in this room to play to advance that agenda. So again, with this partnership during COVID again, we'll be able to establish what we call a framework for action to build really a synergy across the continent around manufacturing. Very clear example on the next slide, you can see more than 30 projects really emerged. And very successful stories that you're going to hear in the subsequent presentation with Prof. Pietro Terblanche around how we've been able to mobilize resources, drive really the mRNA hub, and also been able to at least have a good product comparable to what we have in the West. Very important. So you can see on this map that things have evolved. We have seen again the regulators, definitely, they've done a great job during COVID. And David Mukanga is going to touch base on that as well. So again, AFCAT, as I've said it, you need to know your epidemiology. If you can't test, you don't know the magnitude of the problem that you're going to deal with. And then you have to trace, you have to place those who are infected on treatment, you have to prevent with the vaccines. All those tools, you're going to use them together or collectively to be able to address some of these very challenging public health issues. Dr. Yenu is going to touch base on that, and you can look at it from the bottom, you see, it's in 2019. We didn't know that COVID going to strike in 2020, but we already had that concept really advancing diagnostics, at least on the continent. So again, next year, we're going to touch base on supply. And that's why Martin is here from the Global Fund. You know, the partnership between US CDC, the Global Fund, finds which the African Union is fully supportive to ensure that we deeply localize manufacturing for diagnostics. And it's again quite important that more than 90% of diagnostics at least being used on the continent, lateral flow assays, are imported. We can do this. So then we are being challenged by our donors, stakeholders, putting $millions and say, you're going to find a way to produce at least HIV rapid diagnostic tests. We need to take this challenge, and Martin's going to touch base on that subsequently. And then on the pharmaceutical, you can know this is one of the oldest projects from the Union. The Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan of Africa, Dr. Janet is going to touch base on this. The great ideas from the Union. But again, we need to push this agenda forward based on the lessons learned from COVID. And then we're going to wrap up. It doesn't mean that we're going to have substandard product as we scale. It's not a nascent industry. It has been there, but we have this opportunity to drive this agenda. And then that's where David comes in with his vast experience working with regulators to be sure that we have good product, affordable, to be able to address those key challenges that I mentioned, cutting across the value chain. So again, thank you for being here. We are looking forward for a very insightful session. Thank you. So I'm going to invite the first speaker. He's online, Dr. Yenu. I think I'm not going to go back to his bio. Vast experience and non-scientist and head of the lab divisions and system at the African Union, Africa CDC. Dr. Yenu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nikesh. Thank you, moderator, co-moderators. Let me share my slide, and I hope. Can you see?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Let me thank the organizers of this conference for inviting us to share in our experiences and the Africa CDC work in the area of increasing access to diagnostics in the African continent. And we really appreciate this opportunity. Let me take a few minutes and then walk you through some of the things that we are doing here at Africa CDC. our laboratory programming looks into these global and continental health goals because these are commitments by our member states. So we need to understand that what the laboratory system contribution will be for these important programs, and these are known documents in the African Union. So the Agenda 2063, the Health Strategy, AIDS-Watch Africa, accelerated implementation of IHR, and of course sustainable development goals. These are global commitments, and laboratory has an important stake in all of these implementation of these important milestones. So when I specifically come to availability and accessibility of quality laboratory diagnostics, this is important, as I said, to meet the continent's health agenda. They are important for our early warning surveillance and response system because lab is an entry point for detection of any outbreak. And it's also important for routine healthcare services for decision making by clinicians. And we know also laboratory plays an important role in research and development, including vaccine manufacturing, diagnostic manufacturing, therapeutics, and so on. Because lab is a component of the clinical trial ecosystem, which is a key aspect in that sphere. So, what are the main challenges of access to laboratory diagnostics? Number one is laboratory diagnostics for Africa priority diseases may be absent. We have seen that one for monkeypox. We have seen this during the Marburg virus outbreak. So really, for some diseases, diagnostics don't exist. When they are available, some may not meet the quality standards. They may not have gone through regulatory processes, and they have not been evaluated. In some of those are research use only. So that's really a big challenge. And they are not accessible due to various reasons, because of supply chain, because of cost. Maybe the African market is not targeted and so on, as we have seen during COVID-19. And then when diagnostics are available, the introduction is quite slow because of a number of logistic challenges, evaluation, regulatory processes, and so on. So diagnostics may be available for malaria, TB, HIV because of significant investment. We did an exercise in terms of coming up with priority pathogen list for Africa CDC, working with the different partners. And this priority listing actually is based on the public health emergency preparedness and response point of view. It's not really based on the burden of the disease. So these are the pathogens that cause 95–98% of outbreaks in Africa. So if you go country by country and see what diagnostics are available for these pathogens, in many cases you may not find. So this is what it makes important that we need to consider diagnostic capacity for these priority diseases, including the unknown agents, because at one point we will be challenged with a new etiology, usually viral disease, as we have seen with COVID-19. So all of our diagnostic access work should consider this priority disease in addition to the global commitment for other diseases like TB, HIV, and malaria. So if I bring to your attention, there are 3 values of days in any diagnostic manufacturing. There are a lot of developments happening, however, very few go into commercialization because of a number of reasons. There are no resources to do very good research and development. Some of those are faulty from the designing stage, and regulatory process take long time, and so on. So because of that, I think many research and development efforts remain at shelf, so they don't go into commercialization. After commercialization, it takes also an important step to take it to adoption. That really requires feasibility studies and evaluation studies. You have to convince ministries of health to adopt the technology. You need to have a supplier and the appropriate marketing strategy and so on. And of course, many diagnostics may be adopted, but they may not go into scale up because of lack of resources, or in terms of feasibility and so on. So an important diagnostic test has to pass through all of these hurdles, and it's always challenging to get diagnostics because of a number of challenges in those values of tests. So what is the reason for the slow introduction of diagnostics? One is paucity of data on performance. Because there are no evaluations, or evaluations, if they happen, they are not independent. And then there is time lapse in conducting evaluations. At times, companies are challenged by being asked to evaluate technology in every country. And I remember the PIMA point of care city for testing was evaluated 19 times in Africa. Okay? It's a waste of resource, waste of energy. So there is no really harmonized evaluation mechanism. And of course, there is capacity limitation on our centers of excellence in conducting these evaluations. And there is also a lack of system to share data. And of course, I think we will discuss here in this panel that there are also some regulatory challenges. On local manufacturing of diagnostics, we brought some 11 institutions in a meeting to understand what was the major challenge. The major challenge is funding. There is really, limited funding to increase the production capacity, and there is also, difficulty in terms of accessing hard currency, and this is affecting the local manufacturers to be competitive. Raw materials in many instances have to be imported, so there is a lot of challenge in importing. Taxation, regulatory challenge, and then cost of production. And there is a logistic challenge in terms of exporting of test kits for evaluation and validation. And of course, many manufacturers, they complain that registration is taking long time. And they also complain that there are some unnecessary stringent criteria applied to local manufacturers because from the very beginning, the regulators doubt them in terms of their capacity. And of course, there is a lot of work to advocate the use of local products, because I think the culture in Africa is that generally, if it is local, we consider it a substandard. So we need to change that attitude to really promote use of locally manufactured goods. So this is what Dr. Nikes mentioned, the African Collaborative to Advance Diagnostics. We actually launched it in 2018 at the SLM conference in Abuja, and there was a big consultative meeting that happened in Addis in 2019. The whole idea is to promote local manufacturing. It's also build capacity of centers of excellence or creating biobanks, and harmonize regulation of regulatory processes, and then to do in a global market negotiation. At times, cost per testing in Africa is much more expensive as compared to some other regions. So we need to understand what's driving the cost and what is the reason, and how can we lower the cost of testing so that testing can be applied universally. And this is a proposed AFCAD model. How it works is that we establish a diagnostic advisory committee that will advise the regulatory authorities on the different characteristics of diagnostics. We develop a generic protocol for evaluation so that people will not take long time developing a protocol from scratch. It can be adopted and modified based on the nature of the evaluation. And then we identify centers of excellence in Africa and strengthen their capacity for evaluation of diagnostics. And therefore, after going through all of that processes, and then now we bring and we work with regulatory authorities for registration of those diagnostics. And then we want to bring regulatory convergence so that, if diagnostics is registered somewhere, so it should be accepted, elsewhere as well, without going through a repetitive evaluation process. So these are our biobanking centers. They have been strengthened to store the different specimens. They have been trained, and we are producing a biobanking manual, and we are now developing a training material. We are procuring a lot of items to build, the storage capacity and information management So if diagnostic evaluation is required, so we'll coordinate across these biobanking centers so that we do multi-site evaluation of diagnostics quickly, and that data will be used to convince the regulatory authorities to register diagnostics and to be utilized by programs at Ministry of Health. So I mentioned also the Diagnostic Advisory Committee, which will be providing guidance on the selection, evaluation, and validation, and has a number of objectives. And this committee, we had our first Diagnostic Advisory Committee meeting with the regulatory committee. This is really a very good convergence, so that we make clear that what is the challenge from our side. We understand also what's the requirement from the regulatory side, and this work will be very, very important for Africa to really bring that harmonized registration of diagnostics. So as I said, this has been established recently and have started functioning. Membership includes senior diagnostic experts representing all regions of Africa and also some partners, and they are working now to develop a roadmap of activities, and our all efforts should be synergized with, we should create synergy with the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, the African Medical Device Forum, and at the last stage, we expect that when the African Medicines Agency is functional, some of these roles will be taken over, and we will work with the African Medicines Agency to create that harmonized regulatory process for medical products. And this is an engagement process, how we are expecting to work with centers of excellence. Manufacturers of IVDs, they can work with Africa CDC. We can link them with centers of excellence. Partners can support to centers of excellence in providing technical assistance. And then our Diagnostic Advisory Committee will oversight the evaluation process. They will recommend technology and so on. And the data that's coming out from this process will be used by Africa CDC for recommendation. It can be used by manufacturers to register diagnostics in other regions, and it may influence procurement. And we are discussing with Global Fund PEPFAR, so that in addition to WHO pre-qualification, those procurement agencies and funding agencies should recognize also the Africa process under the African Medicines Agency. And member states, of course, they can use this data to register diagnostics at their level. So our next step will be, we will continue mobilizing our resources to support this Africa initiative. We will continue advocating on the registration and use of locally manufactured diagnostics. Our Diagnostic Advisory Committee will continue its functioning, and especially our relationship with the outdone process of this harmonization of regulatory processes that has to grow strong and strong. And at one point, the Diagnostic Advisory Committee working with the Regulatory Technical Committee, they will start publishing list of recommended diagnostics. Once we have that list, I think that will serve as a basis for national regulatory authorities to register diagnostics. These are some of the areas that I wanted to share. Again, thank you for the opportunity. I think I was a little bit quick, so sorry for rushing you. But I can entertain some of the questions if raised during the dialogue. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Yenu. We would like to take the second presentation really pretty tight with your overview on the AFCAT initiative, on how we can deal with the regulatory. So let me invite Dr. David Mukanga, who's one of our champions for regulatory. I can see also Dr. Tumi in the room. So we're all putting our heads together to be sure that we don't have substandard products on the continent. So Dr. David, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nikes. Let me just get my presentation on the screen and we'll get going. And as I do that, I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this very important who are in Durban, we are jealous of you enjoying the good weather there and scenery. I believe you can see my screen now. Great. So, Dr. Nikes and the Africa CDC asked me to give a quick overview around regulatory harmonization on the continent, the work that is going on within the Africa Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, AMRH, the aspirations of the continent towards the African Medicines Agency, and some of the linkages with WHO, EQ. I will try to do justice to it in the 10 minutes that I have, and I hope that you find this useful. So just wanted to start by reminding everybody what regulatory harmonization is. And clearly from different quarters is really a process by which technical guidelines are developed to be uniform in the simplest form across participating regulatory authorities. And some of the efforts on the continent to do that is, for example, the AU model law that was created that many agencies on the continent have used to mirror in creating a law for setting up the agency, the AMRH REC initiatives where countries in the economic blocks came together and took international guidelines like ICH and WHO and adapted those to their setting as a whole region. The Africa Vaccine Regulatory Forum on the clinical trial front, developing guidelines and review templates and all of that, and that then countries have adopted across the continent. That is a deliberate and intentional process as opposed to regulatory convergence, where over time countries or regions become more similar in terms of their regulatory requirements as a result of the gradual adoption of internationally recognized technical guidance, documents, standards, scientific principles, etc. So convergence happens over time, it's not intentional, while harmonization is very much intentional. You come together as regulatory agencies or countries and define, what guidances you follow together, based on either international standards or standards that you adopt from elsewhere. And the harmonization has a lot of value, some of which the previous speaker alluded to, some of the challenges with regulation on the continent. So number one is that companies can generate one data set, which then is acceptable across those various jurisdictions that have harmonized on the same blueprints. And that reduces the amount of human and animal experimentation that takes to generate that data. Then the cost of development of regulatory documentation, by companies having to file using different standards in different territories. Then the common standards for evaluation also facilitate the regulatory communication and information sharing because, the regulators are working, using the same standards. And then the challenge that my previous colleague mentioned of local products, those then will become more likely to be acceptable for export to other countries because you are using a standard that people understand and that the different jurisdictions have agreed to. And then the faster access of medicines of high public health need because it's been developed in one jurisdiction, different jurisdiction is following the same standards and guidelines. It's much easier when it comes to the evaluation of those medical products and not just medicine, so diagnostics and other tools. Dr. Nikes referred to this slide, which is a vision that we've all taken from the Africa Union that sort of defines what that harmonization and work sharing vision is, starting with 55 countries in 2009 when this conversation started. Desperate requirements and standards, 4 to 7 years of lag time from when a new product or innovation, a new active substance is registered in the first country to when it becomes, submitted for registration on the African market, long review timelines and so forth, to working around the economic communities, and then ultimately the creation of an AMA as a networked regulatory system that ensure that AMA, the regions and the national, are interconnected, are working together, and that there's a very clear division of labor between across these three levels. And that's some of the work that has been going on by the African Union as the preparations to set up AMA are ongoing. In terms of the continental level standard setting, there have been a number of technical committees in the past under the MRH program, and a number that have been created over the years. It's expected that these will morph into AMA over time, some of them at the beginning. I believe some of them will happen a little bit later, just for the sake of AMA being able to grow and manage, the workload that AMAs will be taking over a lot of this work. But that's the vision at the very high level. And then in terms of the regulatory science architecture, of course you have AMA, the regions and the national authorities, having a very clear division of labor, at least in terms of the medicinal products. There's been an attempt already by the evaluation of medicinal products technical committee to define what the AMA scope is, and there will continue to be need to refine what the regional scope is versus the national level. Clearly, the bulk of the work will happen at the national level. I think AMA will cover about 5% of the essential medicines list there, and the regions a little bit, but the bulk will happen at the national level. And then the national agencies will undertake the scientific work, for AMA just as they have done for the regions. So the experts come from the national authorities. And of course, that's the vision of AMA, to leverage the limited expertise available on the continent in service to all countries. So you draw that wherever it is, technical expertise, assets, regulatory assets, and you leverage them in service of the continent. But certainly the continent will continue to interconnect with WHO, and we'll talk a little bit later about that, in terms of the service that it provides for the products that they assess. And then, other trusted global regulatory actors, leveraging on the work they have done and collaborating with them. India and China being still a major source of API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and finished products for the continent. There needs to be that relationship between the continent and those regulatory authorities. This is my slide. I want to put that disclaimer. This is not an Africa Union slide, its members. This is a slide that I have developed internally, but I attempt to really paint a picture of what the goal AMA roadmap might look like for the continent, beginning at the beginning there with certain activities in year 1 to 2, a bold effort to get AMA to become maturity level 3. I believe that is really, really important to give it the credibility, and the colleagues at WHO are already working with the African Union to define a roadmap to get AMA to maturity level 3 as soon as possible, what WHO defines as a functional, stable regulatory system or agency, and then ultimately what is called the WHO listed authorities, WLA, or what replaces what has been known as stringent regulatory authorities, as soon as possible. I think the value of that, it will give AMA the credibility, the gravitas, to be able to pronounce itself in service to the continent and to play its role on behalf of Africa around the world. The call there in terms of differentiation with WHO qualification is always a big question. I think at the beginning, and there will be different opinions here, is that before AMA becomes maturity level 3, perhaps focus on the scope that the committee has defined, but once it gets to maturity level 3 and ultimately to WLA, some of that scope will really, really expand, especially for products that are priority for the African continent. The biggest burden of malaria is on the African continent. The assessment of those products should happen on the African continent, and so is the range of other products. And then the role of the Africa CDC working with AMA, particularly in defining utilization policy, will really, really be important to enable AMA, especially for new active substances, to assess those going forward as that capacity is built. trials, taking up the work that AMREP has been doing. There is some ongoing work around pharmacovigilance with the Africa Union 3S program. A lot of those, will likely fall or be useful in supporting the setup of AMA. Certainly the challenge there will be how much can AMA take on at the beginning. Do you let it have all the technical committees in AMA from year one, or stretch that out a little bit over time? My view is that start a little bit small, build the track record, and then expand out over time. And then this slide, in the interest of time, just wanted to mention that, even though reliance is very, very important, you cannot rely on others for everything. So the continent needs to build its regulatory muscle, for the assurance of pharmaceutical quality for the continent, and Africa will need its own strong and effective regulatory systems to be able to oversight locally produced and imported products. Yeah, and I'll leave this slide here just to show the value that AMA will bring in terms of product development, marketing authorization, and in the post-approval phase, driving efficiency, in terms of standard setting, which is one of the big things we're talking about today, but also offer a continental approach to the oversight of clinical trials, registration, variations, etc., etc. But also we see in other markets, the requirement for local safety and efficacy data in order to get the registration there. It may be something that AMA would consider to start by encouraging and later on work towards requiring local safety and efficacy data for AMA eligible products, just given the size of our population, 1.2, 1.4 billion people. It's a growing population, it's a significant part of the global population with its own unique genetic composition. Yeah, and then I'll leave this slide, I won't cover it in terms of value proposition of AMA in the different areas. I think the AU has been articulating this for a while. And then just an example of the public health value of harmonization and work sharing. With the regional work that has been going on for a better part of a decade, more than 600 products have been assessed at the regional level, and a significant number, over 300 recommended for registration using those continental platforms. So it shows that harmonization and work sharing is possible. To work share, you must have agreed to a common set of standards, and I think the regions sort of give us an indicator of what is possible in terms of harmonization and work sharing going forward. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Yenu, and now Dr. David Mukanga. Excellent presentations on time. So we're going to move to really our champions for vaccines, Dr. Pietro Terblanche. She's going to give her presentations. I think probably if you have a question, a 1-minute question for her, definitely we're going to take it. But let me invite her so that we can release her. Dr. Pietro, over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to participate and to be part of this very esteemed panel. I'm going to share a few slides with you, and part of it is to also stimulate some thinking and discussion. There we go. So, circling back to what Nikesh presented earlier, who makes the vaccines for global health? If there are two questions: who gets most of the value and who makes most of the volume? And this slide speaks for itself. The high-value vaccines are produced by 5 producers in a specific region of the world, whereas the volume of vaccines that is also serving Africa's needs are produced by a different region, developing countries' vaccine manufacturing network. But where is Africa? And again, Nikesh made it very clearly. 1% of the vaccines that we need, we are able to manufacture. This, during the time of COVID-19, really, again, expedite the knowledge and the intense realization that we are vulnerable. 2009, 2015, again now during COVID, realizing that access and equity are not equal. And therefore, this stimulated the continental initiative where Partners for African Vaccine Manufacturing put together the Plan for Africa. And I want to particularly point out the middle slide. We all realize now, for the last 3 years, that we need an end-to-end ecosystem approach. But if you look at what Partners for African Vaccine Manufacturing has put together here, is indeed an ecosystem. We need this fully functional ecosystem to be able to allow ourselves to produce the critical medical countermeasures and supply this continent. And the previous two presentations, again focusing on regulatory, I'm going to circle a little bit and look at projects specifically that will address science and technology, research, but also building a skilled workforce. But again, end-to-end, an ecosystem that's functional and operational, essential. So the mRNA program, Nikais has asked me to talk a little bit about that in quite specifics. So the background to this is, how do we make mRNA technology accessible for low and middle income countries? How do we empower low and middle income countries to have access to future relevant technology? And this is a public-private partnerships of 15 entities straddling 4 continents, but the center of it sits in Africa. The Center for this program, which is a long-term program developing mRNA vaccines and share that with low and middle income countries, based in South Africa, in Cape Town, Afrigen, and I'm proudly associated with this entity, developing technology in the absence of a technology transfer, and with 6 partners on the African continent will make mRNA technology available for the continent for vaccine innovation and hopefully, but beyond that, also for therapeutics. So what is this program? This program is to build a platform for end-to-end mRNA vaccine innovation. In the absence of a technology transfer in 2021, in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, no one was prepared to share technology. The group of scientists in South Africa, a partnership with Afrigen and Wits University, with support from the leaders of 30 and 50 years of mRNA research, Drew Weissman, Barney Graham and others assisted us, and this is what this slide shows is the complex process of an mRNA vaccine. Today in South Africa we're building this platform end to end while we're already innovating around some of the challenges for the science associated with mRNA, thermostability, cost of goods, but also durability and potency. So this platform in realization and building to establish the basis for mRNA technology to be transferred to our other partners. And in our process, just a slide to show the results as we're moving forward in preclinical studies now confirming that the vaccine developed in South Africa, AfriVac 2021, is comparable to Moderna's vaccine. And continuing now the development work, already looking at XBB 1.4 to build on this platform. What else? Now we have COVID-19 and mRNA has demonstrated its ability to produce fast, effective and safe vaccines. We have already started to evaluate the unmet needs on the continent, the pathogens of concern on the African continent. We have done an assessment of which of these will be suitable for mRNA vaccines and also look at the partners, CEPI, Gavi, UNICEF, in what are the priority pathogens, so what we build on the continent and the platform we build has sustainability in terms of the pipeline that will be produced on this platform. And this is a very significant slide. This is a slide of the 15 partners in the mRNA program, 15 partners straddling 4 continents, public-private partnerships. These are the vaccine candidates that we've prioritized and where the early work has already started to develop mRNA vaccines for these pathogens. Remember, this is an access program, so the intellectual property developed here will be shared by the partners in various models of sustainability. Fundamentally, the center for this end-to-end sits in Africa, in the continent, in Cape Town. Again, back to the continent, I want to make a plea for as we invest in the research and development, that we have an end-to-end approach. I think I've just lost. An end-to-end approach, and that we do not make the mistake we've made 40 years ago in the assessment of should we develop a TB vaccine or should we not. If at that time the full value assessment was used, we would have developed a TB vaccine 40 years ago. So we are, in our assessment for vaccine candidates, very carefully look not only at return on investment, but also look at what is the full value of a vaccine developed. I want to share a slide with you on the continent. If we look at the top 100 research and development organizations in the public sector, which are relevant, those organizations that's needed and relevant for the capacity and capability to develop vaccines, and some of it very relevant for diagnostics. Top 100, the map here shows you the regionalization on the continent. If you look at the top 500, the pattern doesn't change. If we look at the specific disciplines that will support vaccine and diagnostic development, the pattern doesn't change. If we look at pharmaceutics and pharmacy, the pattern doesn't change. And if we ultimately then look at manufacturing skills, the pattern doesn't change. We, on this continent, need to build these pockets of excellence, these regions where we have and starting to develop critical mass. If we want to complete the ecosystem for diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutic development, these are the organizations and the pockets that we need to strengthen. We look at, and those are funded mostly by public sector and donor funding. If we now circle back to research and development in private entities, the assessment that the PAVM has done, if we look at the private entities on the continent, maximum 6% is invested in R&D. If we look at the biotechs, about 50 to 60% are invested in R&D end-to-end. But on the continent, in the sector of vaccines, there are only 6 biotechs. The same way, we need to find incentives for private entities on the continent to invest in research and development in partnership with the universities and research councils. We need to foster bio-entrepreneurship on this continent to extend and expand our abilities to do end-to-end research and development. And if we look at an analysis of who do we collaborate with, and this again is a plea to myself, my colleagues, the analysis we've done over many, many years is it looks like Africa collaborates much easier with Europe and the US, whereas the collaboration between African entities and African universities and African-based private-public partnerships are very, very low. We need to foster the collaborations on the continent and learn to work with each other the way that we work with the Northern Hemisphere. And then this slide is a call for all the pledges made to Africa. During COVID-19, many, many organizations pledges to bring technology. And there is at the moment a concern of the overcapacitation for full finish and a lower and unsatisfactory and unsustainable capacitation for drug substance manufacturing end-to-end. The call for the partners in COVID-19 who pledged to invest in on this continent is, please stay with us, continue beyond the pandemic, because we're building a vertically integrated sector on this continent. The last slide. When we build R&D capabilities end-to-end, let's consider a value chain approach. From manufacturing capabilities, which will stimulate also the manufacturing of drug substance and not only full finish, right through to priority pathogens, to really, really focus on vaccines and products that is suitable and needed by the African market and can be developed, can be manufactured in a sustainable manner with cost of goods also a consideration. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So I think we're consistent here. We need to collaborate, communicate, coordinate to ensure that we build a resilient health system. I just have one request for all of you. Prof. Pietro has been really resilient during this COVID-19 pandemic, been able to design end-to-end with her team Vaccines produced in Africa, made in Africa, similar to the Moderna vaccines, deserve a round of applause from all of you. So thanks so much for the two previous speakers as well. They have been really critical in what they're doing, very serious, tailored, seasoned scientists, and again also a good advocate for the continent. So we're going to move to therapeutics. Let me invite Dr. Janet to deliver our presentation. Dr. Janet, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. My slides are going on. Okay. No, thank you very much, and my esteemed delegates are on the floor. I just want to take us back to the year 2005 when our continent was grappling with HIV, TB, and malaria, and our heads of state convened in a special summit in Abuja in Nigeria, and they decided that we needed to take matters in our hands as our health security, our own people's security was at stake. And that is when the decision for Africa to begin producing our own medical products started. The conversation was building on the rounds of discussions around the TRIPS, the trade and intellectual property related issues, the Doha, that were happening in Doha at the time in the 1995, I think, 2005, sorry. And so during that period, we as a continent thought it wise to look inward and see what kind of capacity do we have in the continent to produce the antiretrovirals that would respond to the HIV pandemic that we were grappling with at the time, the tuberculosis and the malaria pandemics. These diseases are still an issue on the African continent. Many of our children and young and women, pregnant women, are still dying from malaria. And so we still need these medical products produced locally on the continent. And we're not talking about them being new. We're talking about medicines that are generic that we don't need really to pay a patent, to register a patent for. So we need to to leverage our capacities to be able to move forward on that agenda. And that is the birth of the PMPA as we know it, the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa. What kind of continent do we have? Economically, we're sitting with a continent that that is of 1.3 billion and with the 2.6 trillion USD. Africa has definitely, as other speakers have said, has continued to rely heavily on imported medical products, including those ones that are of the products of the diseases that are more uniquely affecting our continent compared to other continents. We still rely on imports for those to address our unique diseases. And we are producing 3% of the global drug production and importing over 80% of our pharmaceutical products. Specifically, we import them from India and South Africa. In some of our countries, though, some countries are doing very well, where their own local supply for pharmaceuticals is actually from local products. And those few countries here, we're mentioning South Africa, Morocco, and a few others. In some countries in Central Africa, 90% of all of the pharmaceutical consumption is imported. We already had this slide show up where we're looking at why the PMPA. The PMPA is one framework that enables us to contribute to improving public health outcomes by encouraging and ensuring that we have access to medical products, not only the ones that are produced in Africa, but to ensure that they are of good quality, they're made available and affordable for our people. And it's two-pronged, so it's about public health outcomes, but it's also about industrialization and generating economic benefits from those who engage in the production of these medicines, so that we have a self-reliant industry that is able to supply at a sustainable level the medical products that are needed. The vision of the PMPA it was endorsed by our African heads of state since the 2007. So this is really over a decade of working towards having a reliable local pharmaceutical ecosystem on this continent. But the PMPA suggests some solutions to the current challenges that the industry is confronted with, and the challenges have already been elaborated because they cut across even the manufacturing of vaccines. So the issue of access to affordable, predictable, long-term kind of capital is an issue that has been, our private sector continue to tell us that the banking systems are not designed to support local manufacture of either vaccines or therapeutics. So we need to look at our financing systems and see whether they really speak to local manufacture and begin to look at how our African development banks and other development banks across the world can come to the party and speak about how to reduce and give cheaper capital to those who are interested in investing in Africa, in Africa's local manufacturing. The issue of access to technology, this is a completely very high-tech sort of endeavor, and we believe that Africa will not succeed unless we put in some more effort in the issues related to access to technology. The other issue we already looked at is the issue of the human resources and skills base. We don't have sufficient skills to undertake this, so sometimes even though the investors would like to come to Africa, they want to find the skills available on the continent where we can have our foreign investors coming in and investing and leaving a spillover of knowledge and skills with our African people so that we can sustainably, proceed with the manufacture of these products even once the foreign investors have left. Issues of lack of market data and intelligence. So market data is important for investors. No investor is going to to come and invest in an ecosystem where there's not the market is not clearly understood and the data is not reliable or is not available. Regulatory systems, we've already pondered quite a bit on that, and issues of procurement and supply chain systems that are not robust enough. They are hampering progress in our development of the pharmaceutical ecosystem. Issues of policy incoherence, the public health policy, the trade and industry policy, the finance policies, if they're not coherent and speaking the same message towards supporting the pharmaceutical industry in Africa, we find it very difficult, and that is why we call upon member states usually to ensure that those who are interested in investing in the local manufacture of medical products, that the policies that would support this system need to be harmonized and need to be coherent in the way they speak to addressing the issues of local production. Issue of collaboration and fostering of strategic partnerships and ensuring business-to-business platforms are working together is an area already that has been said. Investment in R&D, and we can see from across all of these challenges that no single ministry or organization can actually address these challenges on their own, so the need for us to collaborate and work together. So the reason why I'm here is to introduce to you our coordinating mechanism that we have put together, just like we did for the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative. The PMPA is creating a mechanism that will enable us to coordinate all the fragmented initiatives that are coming up on the continent about local production of pharmaceuticals. Every country may think that they could do it, but it may not be viable. So we need this clear coordination that is intentional to ensure that the resources that are put into the local manufacturing ecosystem are used efficiently and effectively, and they can bring about the impact that we desire. Here we have proposed in Nairobi last year together with 8 of our member states from the 5 African Union regions. From the north, we had Tunisia and Algeria, South Africa and Zimbabwe from south. From central, we had Chad. From west, we had Cote d'Ivoire. And from East Africa, we had Kenya and Ethiopia. In the discussions that we had together with these stakeholders, including our manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturers associations, we were able, and partners, of course, here can mention PATH and some from the academia. We managed to come up with a strategy on how we're going to create a mechanism to collaborate and also to be able to be effective. The pillars of the PMPA that are addressed within the coordination framework that we have proposed, we're going to have technical working groups that focus, one on GMP, another on trade policy and incentives, another one on supply chain management, R&D and technology transfer, and one on access to finance, one on data systems and market intelligence, and lastly, one on capacity enhancement and training. The 7 working groups, including one on supply chain, as I was talking to Global Fund a while ago, we would like to have all of these technical working groups supported by the partners who are interested in these specific areas, so that all the initiatives surrounding these areas can be coordinated under the African Union Development Agency, so that we have that one-stop shop where we understand who is doing what in these specific areas, and then we have a steering committee which would constitute definitely of the African Union Development Agency and some other champions on the continent for the local production agenda, and would have a partnership consortium that would be supporting all of that work. The work that we envision here is to enable Africa to have a competitive, self-reliant industry. Our last piece of work is that I wanted to introduce to you is the compendium development. We're developing a compendium that is going to guide member states to make decisions in terms of what are the best policies and practices if you want to develop your pharmaceutical industry, either as a region or as a country. And we have categorized the various countries. We will look at the entire continent and categorize the various countries into 4 groups, where the first group will be will be those manufacturers, those countries that are manufacturing all dosage forms. They manufacture either vaccines, meet more than 50% of their local needs, export outside the continent. So those are the kind of questions that we'll be asking ourselves for each group. For group number 2, we'll be looking at those that manufacture at least up to 30 to 50% of their local needs, meet 30 to 50% of their local needs, and so on and so forth. So with all these groups, we'll be able to also guide, plus of course all the other policies and practices that are needed for our pharmaceutical sector to grow. We will be working with the various stakeholders to come up with this compendium, and then use that compendium to guide our work going forward. In conclusion, and I will probably maybe read out this slide so that we can take home a message about where we want to go. What we have seen is that we need sustainable manufacturing in Africa, and it demands for a strong continental coordination mechanism that we are proposing. It warrants a viable and business case for manufacturing across all health products and technologies, while encouraging equitable access to all health products that Africa needs. The coordination of the implementation of the PMPA is a right step for the African continent, given the considerations, the lessons that we learned from COVID-19 and the vaccine apartheid that we went through at that time, and some of the issues that of regulatory constraints that we have been experiencing. That is why we need a strong regulatory system as well, accompanying our local manufacturing ecosystem. And I think the AUD and NEPAD's effort to establish African Medicines Agency through our African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative is testimony to this, the effort that we are putting forward to the continent to ensure that we have the right regulatory and effective regulatory system that can assure the quality and efficacy and effectiveness of the medical products that will circulate in our markets. Access to pharmaceutical products and services is essential for the health and well-being of our continent, and the pharmaceutical industry has to grow in Africa, really, and there are no alternatives. We are the ones that will make this happen. We need to own it, and we need to grow it. I thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, thanks. Excellent. No, good. Thank you so much. We need to grow it. We need to own it. So I think we want to take just one question for Prof. Pietro before we release her. And we're going to continue the conversation. So let me introduce then Michael Meinhardt to take the second part of this session. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Janet, for your presentation and also for the insight into sustainable manufacturing in Africa and really what that framework looks like. Prof. Pietro, I know you need to rush to the airport, but I have a parting question for you. Just looking at the success that Afrigen has had on the African continent in developing intellectual property and really focusing on research and development, how do we stimulate that and replicate that model within the African continent to make sure that we're not just receiving technology transfers, but also developing our own intellectual property on the continent for the continent?
Michael, thank you, and apologies that I have to take the last flight out tonight to Cape Town. We have to build the hardware, the software, and the brainware on the continent. And I think part of one of the slides that I showed is understand where are the entities that can build primary skills, the academic institutions that builds the discipline knowledge, understand where are the research entities and the research universities where we can build research knowledge, and then we need the private sector. We need workplace experience. In the last 18 months to 2 years, Afrigen's staff has grown from 22 to 134. We had to train people in mRNA. None of us before that time knew anything really about mRNA. We've done that with support from funders, from sending people to the US, to Europe, to Korea for training. But Africa needs to invest in our own training modalities, from single disciplines to research to private sector giving workplace experience. We have to build careers for our people. It does not help just train them. We have to build careers for them.
Thank you very much. I hope you make your flight.
Thank you very much.
Great. No, thanks. Now that we all have now grasped a little bit where we're heading to, we need supply chain. We need to have the market. We need to be sure that product made in Africa will land in the US. So we need to trust in ourselves. We have seen already with the mRNA hub how they were able from nowhere get an mRNA vaccines equivalent to the Moderna vaccines. I think it's very important. Those are lessons learned and takeaways. And more importantly, how we cannot really repurpose or pivot it for other diseases, infectious diseases on the continent. So let me invite then Martin Otten from the Global Fund to share his own perspective on how we can really reshape that market in terms of demand intelligence and ensure that we can actually move some of these products to the global market. So Martin, you have the floor.
So thank you, and thank you for inviting me. And I want to share today why we, the partners listed on the slide, are hopeful and very hopeful that soon we'll be able to source a biological product, an HIV diagnostic, from the continent. What we're talking about today builds on existing and new approaches to source more of the products where most of the demand is, And in the mandate of the Global Fund, we're focused on HIV, TB, and malaria. So today I'm representing the Global Fund, but I'm sharing an initiative across multiple partners, including PEPFAR, which is the US government program to support the fight against HIV. First of all, very quickly, what is the Global Fund? Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may have not. Public-private partnership, established more than 20 years ago. We raise and we disperse about $4 billion a year to fight HIV, TB, and malaria. We're primarily giving grants to governments, and it's a partnership with a diverse board and governance with countries, the recipient countries, the implementers, and communities at the heart. We work across more than 100 countries, and around half the money we spend on health products for either prevention, diagnosis, or treatment. So we have some money to spend to buy the products when they are there. What we do bring is scale, the scale of being able to mainstream the availability of new technologies and new producers of technology. With such a big buying power, we have a responsible to be purposeful about how we buy and use our money to meet multiple objectives. Fundamental amongst those are ensuring equitable access. We talked about that, heard about that earlier today. Quality, we've also heard about that. Reliable supply and supply security. So through this established partnership of more than 20 years of experience and sourcing skills, we really want to leverage our knowledge and expertise to see how we can actually source more products closer to the demand, strengthen the supply security and sustainability, because we're not the only people buying these products out there. Governments having a large proportion of the burden on the finances as well. So we've identified 6 levers where we can support this, and I'm going to focus on a couple of those today. More tactically, moving from a sort of a strategy to what we want to do over the next years, is to focus as we move into our new funding cycle, our new budget cycle, which is in January next year. We want to support regional workshops to develop a region-led plan that we can support. We want to engage with partners to support the regulatory strengthening initiatives we've heard about today. We want to have continuous advocacy, both on the supply side with the industry partners we have, but also on the partners who are supporting the fight against the diseases. And specifically, what I'm going to talk about in my last slide is a tactical tool called the Expert Review Panel. So the Expert Review Panel is a mechanism that accelerates our ability to buy something before it's got full stringent regulatory approval. We've launched in August an open call to look for suppliers on the African continent who are ready or near to ready to be able to manufacture and supply rapid tests for HIV. The ERP mechanism is not the Global Fund deciding around the quality risks. We use the World Health Organization and independent experts to give us an opinion on the risk of buying something before it's got stringent regulatory approval. So it enables us to procure products earlier than otherwise if we waited for the full stringent requirements to be made. So we make a risk-based approach of the benefit of procuring a product early. Traditionally, we've used this to accelerate completely new innovations, but we're applying it in a pilot manner for these HIV rapid tests to actually see how we can promote the sourcing of these products, the manufacture of these products on the African continent. It's important for manufacturers to realize that it doesn't replace the stringent approval. It's a time-limited approval to enable us to procure things early, but ultimately the products need to be stringently approved. So it enables some sales to be made, some products to start moving before it gets to full stringent regulatory approval. And with that, I will close my presentation.
Thank you, Martin, for the insight into supply chain and really contributing to the discussion today. I am aware of time, so I'd like to jump straight into the concluding remarks. If I can just request that that presentation gets brought up. But I think really just to focus on the summaries for what was discussed today, the message is clear in that Africa has always been on the receiving end of inequitable distribution of healthcare products. And there's a clear framework, a new policy that's been developed to be able to overcome those challenges. May it be in research and development, may it be in intellectual property, may it be in technology transfers and regulatory harmonization, may it be in the capacity building of infrastructure for diagnostics or for vaccines, or may it be in the education and training of the systems to be able to accomplish that. But I think really we need to go away from sessions like these and have clear action steps, and there's a number of ways which we can accomplish it. Of course, there's science, there's translating science into policy, and there's executing policies. But to be able to accomplish that, you need partnerships and you need collaboration, not just within entities and corporates. You need collaboration within countries and continents. So that really is the takeaway message, and I encourage everyone to leave the session in that spirit. With closing remarks, I'd just like to thank our panelists for their insight today, and certainly the guests and audience for your time. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, we are going to have a very intimate session right now on dialogue with African biotech leaders. So if you don't mind, I would just ask you to stretch up a little bit and come to the front so we can have a chat. So it's going to be a fireside chat. We want you to be able to, feel the warmth of the the panel, if you really don't mind. But if you are tired and just want to be where you are, it's also fine. But if you can come a little bit closer, that would be very helpful. Thank you. So in the meantime, I'll be inviting on stage the panelists for this fireside chat.